Welcome to Change the Narrative. I'm your host, JD Fuller, an African-American licensed psychotherapist, professor, diversity coach, consultant, and author. We talk about the isms. We talk about the phobias, anything that marginalizes and oppresses. Everything we are not and everything we are is because of fear. Through a mental health lens, we'll have difficult conversations with celebrity guests, political activists, and everyone in between. Our mind will tell us whatever we want to believe, but the truth lives in the body, and that's where change occurs. Are you ready to change the narrative? All right, Kevin, welcome back to the program, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you having me back.
Well, first of all, let me just tell you, it has not been easy. I appreciate your patience with the chaos,
Oh,
and uh,
no.
and I look forward to getting into your new book.
Yeah, no, I'm just excited to be on. I've been listening to you for a while now, and several of your guests. They're all really compelling. I just hope I can live up to it.
You already have just by being
Yeah.
who you are. Okay, so let's talk about the motivation for this book before we get into it, and then I'm gonna say the name as my second question. But what was the motivation? What happened?
It's it came in steps. It wasn't, as you know, I started out wanting to do screenwriting.
Hmm.
Um, and when I, got sick and moved here, I thought, well, that, not being in Hollywood kind of made it difficult to pursue that, even though there's a lot of production here. But I started writing books, and it was always kind of my thing to write fiction. So it was just sort of an organic thing that happened. I think, what year was that? It was before the pandemic, but the word woke has been villainized. But I think when people started getting woke, I realized I was a little bit ahead of the curve, and I can't explain why. But there were things I was seeing and understanding, and conversations that I was having where people were just kind of like, oh, yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. So it's like that kind of developed as I sort of became more and more aware of what was going on. It developed into something that I thought I needed to share.
Hmm.
And so that's kind of how it came about. But it was really in steps. I never thought I would write nonfiction.
Okay, well
You
that's
know, so
fascinating.
and this, most people who've read my earlier stuff know this is like a very different
Mhm.
kind of writing for me.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
in the name alone, I mean, the White Supremacy Playbook.
Yeah.
Decoded. You
Yeah.
went from characters to characterizations, if you will.
It's so funny, Denise, because this book has taken years. I still have health challenges, where I go down and I can't write. My voice is, as you can hear, my voice is kind of goes in and out.
Hmm.
So I apologize that it's probably shaky now. Um,
No apologies.
but the first couple of years, I didn't know what to call the book. So I kind of just had working title, right? I knew that in my mind when I first started that the doll test was like really kind of a big deal to me. And I know you know what the doll test is, but usually when I ask people, do you know what the doll test is? It's either like a little confusion, and then when you start to explain it, they go, oh, yeah, 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 no.
Hmm.
But most people don't kind of have it in their consciousness, in the front of their mind. But for those who don't know, the doll test would be a black doll and a white doll that black children were asked, which doll do you prefer? They were asked a bunch of questions about preference with the dolls, and there was a overwhelming preference for the white doll over the black doll among black children. Um, so I was thinking I was going to call it like passing the doll test because I kind of feel like
Yeah.
we've been failing, right? But I just thought it didn't resonate with me passing it. So I was like surpassing the doll test, like just getting by it. So I had all these versions in my head, and I was like, I don't know what to call this book. So I was asking a lot of other people, like, what do you think, based on this premise? Nobody could give me a name. And now I because I have a chapter called the White Supremacy Playbook, and I refer to the playbook almost on every page. It doesn't make sense that I ever thought of anything else as a title. It's the
That
only thing
makes
that really makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. When you explain it like that, it was organic. It just was
Yeah,
happening all
it's really
along,
organic.
and then
Now
it emerged.
I put decoded on there because I gave a couple of early drafts to different people, and they went out and they were reading it at Starbucks, and they said they started to feel like people might think they were reading a book about how to become a white supremacist.
Oh,
So, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. So some of them were getting dirty looks and they got kind of embarrassed and they didn't want to read the book. So I added Decoded to kind of, you know, give a little bit of clarification to
wow! I can imagine what they felt like reading that book.
that.
Were they?
Well, they started kind of trying to hide the cover,
But
you
wait a minute,
know.
were they white bodied as well?
One was Latina and one was white. Yeah,
Wow, man,
yeah,
that really brings up a certain image when you say that.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I want to start with the JB quote. People are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them. Out of all the quotes to lead with, why this one?
Um, because I mean, it's really what the book is about, right? It really resonated. A friend of mine from high school was visiting 2 weeks ago.
Mhm.
I originally had a different quote there.
Really?
I put that quote in maybe like a month ago. So it was before the book came out, but I had a different quote there. And I showed her one of the copies with the old quote, and then I showed her that one. And she started screaming and running around my living room because she was like, that is just so perfect. And if you read the book, it's like, it's really what it's about. It's like, 250 years of conditioning, that we don't have any control over. We can't go back and fix that conditioning. But, we're stuck in that place, right? And then
Mhm.
a lot of that is still stuck in our brains. And that's really what the book is about, right? Is
Yeah.
how that I'm really trying to illustrate how those narratives, and this is why the name of your podcast is so great, how
Thank you.
those narratives got into our head,
Mhm.
you know?
Um, I want to say that I, I mean, who doesn't love James Baldwin? So
Yeah,
let's begin with that. And there's
yeah,
a zillion quotes you could have used that would have been great.
yeah,
But I absolutely agree with your friend. I think I'm just looking at it as I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking, that idea of a history, of being trapped in a history, and then also it's got us trapped as well. I mean, it lives in our
yeah,
bodies, it lives in our brain,
yeah,
it is trapped.
yeah,
So that
yeah, it is
really
trapped.
stood out for me, and I
And
was
that's what I think we're endeavoring to do is to like release that history, right, from our bodies,
Mhm.
and to move forward. I'm hoping that that book, even if it's just a fraction of what I got out of writing it, I think that could be a good thing
Oh, we're gonna
because
get there.
I learned a lot. It's
Don't you get ahead. Don't you get ahead. I
No,
want
I'm not going
to.
to get ahead, but I want to say when I set out to write the book, I had very clear ideas in my mind, and to be honest, I had a lot of anger when I first started writing the book. Researching that stuff, drew up a lot of anger, and before I even started writing, I was talking about this stuff constantly. Like I became that guy, where if I was in mixed company and somebody said the wrong thing, I'm like, what do you mean by that? You know what I mean? I was jumping down people's throats. Um, and so I kind of became that guy. And one friend here actually said, you can be irritating. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, you get a tone. And I have to admit, I would get a tone really quickly. And I became aware that the tone distracts from the point, right? Because now you're not listening to my point, you're listening to my tone,
But we
right?
also but we also have to talk about the history of being tone policed, and
Hmm.
how it is a preferred distraction because it implies anger. And if when your skin is the weapon, how can your tone not be additional ammunition? So,
Right,
right.
right. Well, I have mixed feelings about that. I think number one, when you look at the history, there's no way to not be angry. You know what I mean? That's valid to be angry. So I'm not saying that people shouldn't be angry. I just realized that my message, no matter how good it was getting missed.
I get that.
Right. So I realized at a certain point, I had to kind of learn how to address these issues without getting the tone. And
Yes.
writing this book has helped me. I'm not all the way there yet.
Yes.
I'll, Depending on how the discussion comes about and what types of things are happening, the tone will come up. And then I try and, monitor myself in that way. But writing the book helped me to release a lot of that. And there were things that I learned, through writing it that, kind of have been revelatory for me too. So I hope, like I said, even if a fraction of that comes across to readers, that it will be a good thing.
Two things. One, I can tell that in the course of the book. I can,
Hmm.
knowing you, and then also, even if someone doesn't knowing you, you can feel the journey.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
pretty evident
yeah,
in this process. And two, I totally agree with you. When you are teaching, you have to keep it as neutral as possible, even almost emotionless. And what I found out is that when I wasn't feeling the rage, as Dr. Jin says, when I wasn't feeling the rage, or I wasn't, getting passionate about what I was saying, that the sadness would emerge. And that
hmm
started
hmm
coming up in class pretty regularly for me.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
also equally uncomfortable, and excessively vulnerable, with people who we don't know if they can actually hold all of that, all the complexity
right,
of the many feelings of which you speak,
right, right.
right?
Well, yeah, for some people, it's really difficult to manage that, right? So it can manifest in all kinds of negative behaviors, right? Or antisocial behaviors. So we have to be careful and be aware, of how our interactions are affecting other people.
Yeah.
And I quote Paul Mooney several times, in the book, and part of what he says is, you know, you look what you put us through hundreds of years. You know what I mean? Because in his comedy, it was very biting. I think it was, if people weren't familiar with his comedy and they came in, a lot of, white people would get upset and get up and leave, and he would call them out and say, "Look at her. She's uncomfortable after 20 minutes. But they made us uncomfortable for 200 years." You know what I mean? And so I do think about, that there's validity to the anger, there's validity to the sadness. That's humanity. And
That's
any
humanity.
other way to put it is humanity.
That is humanity. I agree with you
Yeah.
completely. Look, there's a lot to unpack, so I decided to choose from a few sections just to tantalize the reader. Um,
Okay.
One thing that I want to start with is talk about the white supremacy playbook, and how it is infused throughout the indoctrination and the process of whiteness, right? Because what you lay out here is that, the structure of
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
And the playbook as the manual. And so it's a great metaphor and also a reality.
Right.
So I wanted you to
Right.
just talk about how that's a part of the indoctrination.
Right. Well, when I get into the playbook part, I talk about, the Merriam-Webster definition is like a series of methods and tactics, right? And so, we grew up in an educational system that was really entrenched in that. And it's not even just the educational system, that's just one part of the puzzle. So, if you think about, the television that you and I grew up on, right, which was a lot of I Love Lucy reruns, soap operas. You really didn't see a lot of black characters, and if you saw them, they were stereotypes, right? They were stereotypes. So, I mean, imagine being a young child who doesn't know anything, and then you're being exposed to this imagery, right? Um, where all the black people are either in subservient positions, or they're, prostitutes or pimps, or they're doing criminal things. Or if you open the fashion magazines and you're mainly seeing whiteness, you know what I mean? Or when you turn on the TV and you're looking at commercials, you're seeing whiteness. So that really starts to kind of construct all of that in your brain, right? Because that's everything that you're getting exposed to. And if you want to get exposed to something else, it's very niche. You know what I mean? We had Jet magazine and we had Ebony and Essence. But if you didn't go there, you didn't see us that much.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hardly anywhere.
And if you were educated in white spaces, you
Right.
you didn't have
Right.
access to those, most likely, or
Yeah.
maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was just telling somebody yesterday that I had a ball in San Diego. I went to UCSD. I had a ball. I loved it down there. But if I had to go back, I don't know that I would go. I probably would have gone to a black college.
Don't get me
Um,
started. Don't even get me started on that.
and I went to a predominantly black high school. I graduated from one anyway. And that was a discussion on a lot of people's minds, when we were getting ready to graduate, like what school should we go to? And all the arguments seemed reasonable. I went down to San Diego for a host of different reasons, but I, when I worked on the TV show, most of the, that was the first time I worked with 99% Black people. And a lot of them had been to Black colleges. And I just saw a difference. I saw a difference.
You
And
know,
it's things like you don't know what you don't know. So when I
yeah,
was in high school, I didn't know
that's
that
it.
my long-term effects would be better because at UCSD, it's not only that you're getting, I know you don't like the word microaggressions,
Hmm.
but it's not only that you're getting that from the establishment, right? You're also getting that from other people of color
Yeah, well,
in a lot of
upholding
ways.
white
And
supremacy.
my parents, were fairly successful in their careers,
Hmm.
and they thought it was important for me to go to college. So it was always my understanding they were going to pay for me to go to college. And I remember my freshman year, it was probably week one. Um, a lot of people of color were coming to me and going, "Wow, weren't those lines long at financial aid?" And I was like, "I don't know." You know what I mean? But I was like realizing, okay, these are assumptions that are being made, not only by white people, but by people of color are making these assumptions about me. And those assumptions are across the board. And this is partly what I wrote the book for, is that, we do make these assumptions about each other.
Hmm.
We get mad when they're made about us from other demographics, but we make them about each other.
And
Um,
I think it all comes from the same machine. I mean, it's all from,
yeah,
upholding a system that we're upholding even when we don't know it.
yeah, yeah,
And it's I mean, that's the indoctrination right there. Like, that's how deep it
yeah,
is.
yeah,
It's also, I think, as people of the global majority, it's a way to join with each other,
hmm,
right?
yeah, yeah,
It's a way to try to, find that commonality, so we can know who you are, because that's one thing we
right.
like to do in the community,
And
check who
and
you are.
that commonality is there. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
It's there. But I do think um, sometimes what's married along with that commonality is blocking your blessings,
Hmm.
right? And I can't speak for every demographic, but I know African Americans. I'm not so sure about these younger generations, but the whole term of the man, right? The man won't let me do that. I don't know how many times you've heard that, but when I was
Oh,
young, I heard that quite a bit. And so when you say the man won't let you do that, and it's not that the man isn't going to try and stop you from doing it. I don't, I want to make that clear. But if you've given up, right, already, then, if some of that commonality is in that area, then we're like basically blocking ourselves from sitting at the table,
mhm.
which is not only a metaphor, you know what I mean? Because when
Yeah.
I worked in corporate, I didn't try to sit at the table. If I went into a conference room with a bunch of people, a lot of times I would go sit on the wall. And you don't realize, all the different ways in which you're subliminally saying, I don't see myself as being valid sitting there, right?
Yeah.
And, that's what I'm hoping the book can kind of um, maybe remove some of those barriers that we're putting up, or some of the stigmas that we carry,
Yeah.
that are developed from out of that.
I hear you. I hear you. I mean, I love hearing different people's perspectives on this, because what it does is it provides opportunities for conversation from different perspectives, and that's what we need
Yeah.
in the community. We
Yeah.
absolutely
Yeah,
need
definitely.
that. Racism being white supremacy and white supremacy being racism. What did you learn about yourself and others when writing Chapter 7, the manifestations of racism?
Oh, well, yeah, the manifestations of racism. I mean, we all have seen all the different places where they come out, right? It's kind of like what we've been talking about,
Right.
um, you know, in commercials, and the when we were on Soul Food, we spent almost a week talking about, and this is something that at the time I was aware of it, but I hadn't really kind of thought it through. We spent almost a week talking about how black males, young black males, are taught to be fearful of their future,
Mm,
right? So I don't know if you remember the statistics, but the statistics were, if you're a young black male, the chances are you will be dead or in jail by the time you're 25,
mhm.
right? And that was repeated throughout, my high school years. And I remember thinking, what am I doing in my life that's going to put me either being dead or in jail? You know what I mean? You have to ask yourself that. And it's like, also how Black parents have to educate their children about, interactions with the police. So those are all the subtleties of where it's layered in. I mean, there's really no point in our life where it's not layered in.
Yeah. And like you said, the limitations of images throughout the years, you start to develop psychologically this mentality that I'm not going to exist. I don't exist, and I don't see myself in the future. And that's the
Right.
danger. That's the danger.
Right. Well, also, there was no reason why I was going to be dead or in jail.
Right, right. That's then there's that. Then
But
there's
that
that.
is something that I had to kind of to grapple with, right? And even just thinking about like how am I going to avoid becoming a statistic, you know?
Mm,
And it's just something, you know. I mean, I wasn't sure if I should make the analogies with the Matrix, but
yeah.
it really did resonate with me because it's a whole reality that's constructed, right? And if you don't know that that's not reality, then you live in it as if it's reality,
Mm,
you
mm.
know. And to
Well,
me, that was like a perfect metaphor. It's like we've been living in this narrative as if it's reality, and now we're starting to deconstruct it and realize that it's narrative. It's not reality, it's narrative.
right. Well, I think what was important about the Matrix is that it's again, it's tied to your journey and people seeing your perspective
Yeah,
and really being
yeah,
open to something that might not have been present before, which is just helpful when you are trying
yeah,
to change the narrative. It's beneficial to hear
yeah,
the different perspectives and the experience.
yeah.
So that's why it made sense to me. Let's
And
see.
sci-fi, just to finish that off, sci-fi is always kind of used to illustrate difficult points,
Of
right?
course, yes.
You know, so Planet of the Apes, the original Planet of the Apes was about slavery,
Mhm.
right? But you and I might watch that, whereas when 12 Years a Slave comes out, we might not want to watch that right away. You know what I mean? Because there's all that sort of generational trauma that is going to get dredged up that doesn't get dredged up if you're watching the X-Men, because the X-Men is also about discrimination,
Mhm.
but in sort of a sci-fi thing. So sci-fi has always been good to kind of illustrate some of those points in a way that feels safe, you know.
Yeah, that's what's fascinating about it. I don't think I knew that growing up, and it's become very clear to me when I'm watching things. Sometimes it's like, oh, damn, that is really this and that's that. It's
Yeah,
taken me a while to wrap myself around that, but I absolutely think that's true.
yeah,
Let's jump to chapter 10. Um, the unfortunate an unfortunate marriage of racism and misogyny. What led
yeah.
you there, and what is the message?
Uh, well, the message is understanding like kind of the complete picture. So if white supremacy is about white people being fearful of getting replaced, right? The question becomes how are they going to get replaced? And the white supremacists will tell you, well, we're going to get replaced through interracial breeding, right? Because interracial breeding doesn't lead to the birth of white children, right? Um, also through immigration. So there are all these things that the white supremacist is fearful of. And so if that's the worry, then the first concern becomes we need white women to give birth only to white babies, right? Because white supremacy is about the heterosexual white male staying in positions of power, right? So if he wants to stay in a position of power and make sure that white people continue to thrive, he has to get control of white women to make sure that white women are not choosing whatever partner they want, right? Because maybe that's not necessarily a white man. So that leg of it is we first must get control of white women, which is a misogynistic slant, right? Because if we can be control of all women, that's important. But we need there's a specificity for what they need to control with white women, which is their you know ability to procreate. And so I put in the book, that some people believe striking down Roe versus Wade was about taking control of the procreative functions, specifically of white women, right? And there's that, you know, there was that, I can't remember her name, Mary something. It's not really important what her name is,
Mhm.
but she's
Okay.
in Illinois, and she spoke at a rally and said, "I would like to thank, Donald Trump for, this is a victory for white life." However, she said it,
Wow.
right after Roe versus Wade, she said, "This is a victory for white life."
I
Then
remember.
she said, "I misspoke," or her representative said, "I misspoke, and I meant to say right to life," or
Yes,
something like
yes, I
that. Yeah,
remember. I remember.
yeah. So I do think that that's a belief, and that's where that kind of component of you've got to marry those two. So first I've got to control white women, and then after that I've got to get control of men of color, right? Because those are my competitors, right? If I'm a white male and I feel that I'm being competed with by men of color, then I need to control them.
Mhm.
So a lot of the things that, the black codes, or whatever you want to call them, all of the sort of racist legislation that has existed in this country is about kind of corralling men of color and people of color in general. But there's a specificity toward kind of controlling men who are seen as rivals, right?
Yeah, that's well explained. That's good.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Um, I think it's important for people to know some of the nuances in the book, so they understand what they're walking into, and that's
Right.
you know what I mean? That's why I picked a couple of the most,
Yeah.
uh, I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't want to say provocative, but most like expressive
Right.
chapters to look at. Okay, so chapter 17, the playbook's collateral damage. What do
Yeah.
you call it? And when a wound keeps being agitated, can that damage ever really repair itself?
Um,
So we've been
let's
we've
see.
been talking a bit about the collateral damage already.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of in the same theme. But I always have this image of damage, and when a car gets dented, you can repair it, and it's almost like new. But there's always something always something that's not
Right.
right,
Right, right.
right.
Well, so that you just answered the question, right?
Hmm.
Or you made me realize what I think my answer to the question is.
Okay.
It can be repaired, but even when the body repairs itself, there's a scar, right? And so it can't necessarily be repaired where to the point where it's like the damage never happened. Even in your car, it's like, you know, I got rear-ended, when I first got here, and they repaired the car, and it looked the same. But the car, when I would pop the trunk, it would open itself.
Oh, okay.
After the repair, when I would pop the trunk, it wouldn't open itself. And it also made little rattling sounds that it didn't make. So I was aware. I ended up getting rid of that car because I felt like it was a constant reminder of the damage that was done to the car, and it took a really long time to repair. It looked fine from the outside, but I was aware that damage had been done to the car. And so even when your body, it might heal mostly up if you're lucky, but there's probably a little bit of a scar that if you point it out, you can see it. And I think that's where we are, right? It's like we can repair it, but not to a point where we are, where the damage becomes completely invisible to us.
Yeah, that was a great example. I appreciate that. You worked in Hollywood. We talked about it a little bit. I just want you to dabble a little bit in what the white supremacy playbook looks like in the industry, and what are some of the familiar tactics used.
So I'm happy to say I think that there's been some significant shifts, in the last probably 5 years or so. Um, but one of my friends who read the book recently said, "I'm never going to look at movies the same." And I'll be honest, full disclosure, I originally had structured the book where I had part one, and part one was all kind of the real world examples, and part two was going to be a lot of film and TV examples. And because film and TV is kind of an area I'm really familiar with, it felt to a lot of readers so specific that it felt like this is for film students. This is for
Uh,
people who are studying film and TV. And so I removed a lot of stuff. So I left some stuff, but I removed a lot of stuff. But I think that's why I say the name of your podcast, "Changing the Narrative," is interesting because the narrative in white supremacy, I did a whole chapter on Birth of a Nation,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And it's the portrayal of Black people in that is so it's a portrayal of Blackness through the white gaze, to the extent that the main Black characters are actually white actors in blackface, right? So there's no real authenticity in that. And I kind of feel like to a degree that's where we're starting. That was 1915, I think. So that's where we're starting with this imagery of Black people as white people have chosen to portray us, right? So we're starting. That's our starting point. So I removed it, but I did a whole chapter on Tarzan the Ape Man. You know what I mean? And so Tarzan the Ape Man, um, 99% of the people that die in there are Black. Like nobody else dies except for Black people, and they're really disposable. There's no worry about should we bury them? Should we have a ceremony? It's just like they're just killed off, and so you know that became a trend that lasted for a really long time, where the Black people would at least die first, you know. And so it almost became kind of a joke. But there's also a really concerted need to disempower Black characters, and especially Black males. They have to be disempowered. And so that's frustrating. And you'll see that, and that's why I say I ruin movies for a lot of people, because people will go see the movie and then I'll go see the movie and they'll say, I loved it. And I'll say, well, really? Because it was really racist. And what about X, Y, and Z? And I can't remember one circumstance where the person said I was wrong. It's something that we're not, I think we become, desensitized to seeing these images to the point that we're not noticing them. One of the examples I give in the book is Star Wars The Force Awakens with a Black stormtrooper. And I don't know if you're watching the Star Wars movies, but that was such a big marketing point that there was a Black stormtrooper, and it created a whole hubbub among people who thought there should not be a Black stormtrooper. I don't know if you remember, there were a lot of complaints from,
Yeah.
sort of that stratosphere. But when I saw the movie, it was like he was a coward. He couldn't fight. He lost every battle.
Wow.
He didn't want to fight. And the only thing that caused him to want to fight was when a white character was in jeopardy. Then he would jump in to try to save her, right? And both times that he tried to save her, she had to save him because he was completely ineffective. And by the end of the movie, he was in a coma because he lost his battle and he was in a coma. So I'm like, he's essentially completely ineffective, which means he has no agency. Nothing he does affects the story at all. Right? This is an extreme example, and John Boyega, who played that character, complained. He said, "Don't put Black people in movies and act like their character is going to be important, and then make them unimportant." You know, and so yeah, there's no way you could feel good about playing that role because he was so ineffective. And I could go through a dozen movies
Oh, I know you could. Yeah.
in which that's done.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And like you said, to people, I mean, I think that majority of us in Black bodies do recognize it and know it, but like you said, desensitized to thrive. I mean, how much can you take in at one time? And so we pick our battles. But I do think when I point things out, there was an incident the other day. I'm not a Hollywood example, but I was in a restaurant and I was in the line, and a white gentleman just walked past the line, walked to the front. And I said, people of color would never do that. That's just not
Hmm.
right. He
Hmm.
waited till he got to the front to ask the black guy, is this the line for reservations or not? Right.
Hmm.
So then he went back to the end of the line. Later on, we were sitting down, and this Asian gentleman was in the line, and he asked the person next to him, "Is this instead of walking to the front?"
Right, right,
He was
right.
at the end of the line and asked the person next to him. And I pointed out to my white friend, and I said, "You see the difference?"
Hmm.
There was no busting through
Yeah,
people and
yeah,
just, kind of taking that kind of privilege at hand. And I think those kind of nuances, particularly in film, are so often missed because they don't impact people. How do they impact
right.
people?
Right.
Right?
Well, and that's what agency is. White supremacy tells white men they have agency to go and forge their way, right? And so, you know, it's not that all white people might do that, but it's not uncommon, right? And so, the whole idea of Tarzan is this sort of Superman, right? He was Superman before there was Superman because he conquered not only, you know, the continent of black people, but all of the beasts that were within it. He was the master of all of them. And so this is kind of like the idealized version of white supremacy, right? This little white baby who's dropped in Africa to fend for himself and is raised by apes but becomes the king of the jungle. That's the whole idea. So, and that's part of the collateral damage, right? Is that, you know, everybody is kind of negatively impacted in some way, you know.
It just made me think of something when you said that. Um, Back then, it was so simple to, enact a playbook. It was so
Yeah.
simple,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Let's make a jungle and let's
Yeah.
drop a baby, and then
Yeah.
we'll become the king of the jungle, and and the
Right.
message is the indoctrination is set.
Yeah.
Now they have to be more sophisticated. It's so much
Yeah.
more nuanced. Like
Yeah.
and I say this, if you've heard the podcast, you've heard me say it. The commercials, you rarely see dark brown skinned people loving
Mm.
dark brown skinned people
Yeah.
on television or on the screen.
Yeah.
You really
Yeah.
have to search for it. Uh,
Yeah.
that is such a subtle, nuanced way. Well, we have black people, where the colorism
Right.
takes over, and they have to. One is evenly brown skin, and the other one is light. It's rare
Right.
that you
Right.
see it.
Yeah.
That's the more subtle, nuanced playbook being enacted.
Right. And if I had to, speculate about that, I would say that that's, during slavery, one of the big fears was of, uprisings, right? That the slaves would rise up and kill the masters. And so it was really important to keep um, black people in situations where they couldn't congregate too much and they couldn't plan, you know what I mean? And you didn't really want any kind of cohesion within black communities because you were afraid of what that might lead to, right? And so I think that that's probably an offshoot of that in some level, when I worked at DreamWorks, there were a group of black people who would play dominoes out in the lunch hour, and after a time, they were asked not to do that, right? And I think that I talk about black methodologies and white methodologies, kind of knee-jerk reactions, but I think part of that is there's a discomfort of seeing black people congregating. You know what I mean? Even if they're just having fun,
Well,
that makes
especially if they're
some
having
white,
fun.
yeah, but it makes some people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Even some black people might be uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. You talk about rebranding, and I want to know in the last couple of questions, what does it look like to rebrand America and the world? And as a part of that rebranding, I imagine equity needs to be a significant aspect of it. Do you think that's possible?
I mean, I talk in the beginning about the optimist versus the pessimist and how you
Hmm.
could look at the same thing. And I do think of myself as an optimist.
Hmm.
So I have to think it's possible, because I can't be an optimist if I don't think it's possible. But, it's one of those things where when Obama first ran for president, I was like, it's not going to happen. There's no way. You know what I mean? And a lot of black people were saying, we will not see a black president in our lifetime. And we did, and he was reelected. Um, you know, on the same note, I didn't think, I've seen all the sci-fi movies, with the self-driving cars, and I thought I'll never live to see that, right? But we're living to see it. So there's been an acceleration, I think, in the last couple of decades where things are accelerating. Um, and so I have to think, it's going to be a lot of hurdles to get over to get that kind of equity, but things are accelerating, and it may just be that we'll live to see these things.
I like your
Maybe.
I like your lens. It's helpful. So as I said in the beginning, it's very clear that this book um, is your racial identity process, your journey,
Yeah.
and your reality, and it's woven into so many aspects of it. I just want to know, what have you learned about yourself now versus 10 years ago, or even before you wrote the book? What does that look like for you?
Ooh, that's um, that's a tricky one because I just feel like so different now, even than myself 10 years ago. Let alone 20 years ago. Um, and I imagine a lot of us feel that way at the age that we are now because just of the kind of things that we've had to go through. But I think the main thing that I could say is, um, I don't think I would walk to the front of the line, but I do feel so much more empowered, just sort of in my own kind of um, skin, for lack of a better word. I think having been able to kind of deconstruct the playbook and deconstruct um, a lot of the methods and tactics that were used to, make Black people feel, a way that a lot of us feel. I think understanding that in sort of a clearer chronology has helped me to realize how false most of it is, right? And if it's false, then why do I need to carry that,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of things that I feel just more kind of, like I have more agency. My opinions matter. A few people told me I shouldn't write the book, or they asked me, well, what are your qualifications? Why are you qualified to write this book? And I had to think about that for a second, and I was like, well, like you said, this, there's an aspect of this book that is very memoir-like, and then there's an aspect that's very kind of textbook-like.
Mm.
But I am telling my story and like kind of how I came to certain realizations and epiphanies. Um, but I knew that a lot of those things were relatable because I didn't grow up in a vacuum. You know what I mean? So I knew that there were other people who had similar experiences and kind of came away with similar feelings. And so I, you know, I did my own empirical study. That's the way that I looked at it. So I can write the book. And so, and a lot of the narratives that we cling to, I don't know if you're familiar with Joy DeGruy,
Of
but
course.
yeah, I listened to a talk by her, and she was talking about this guy who's considered a trailblazer in anthropology, and how he came up with all these racial constructs to like describe different races, and there's no science to it at all. And he's considered the father of sort of a lot of these ideas, binomial nomenclature, coming up with
Mhm.
Homo africanus and Homo europaeus and all these, and then all these descriptions, which are really stereotypes that I don't know what he based those things on. You know what I mean?
It's unbelievable.
And right, it's unbelievable. And then you have to question who, when he was coming up with these things, who was telling him what qualifies you to do it. And so that's probably my biggest takeaway is that, a lot of the things that I've been told, the narratives that I've been given are false. And so it's, a matter of kind of trying to construct, as much of the truth as is possible, because there are two sides to each story and there's the truth a lot of times. So you may not be able to find the truth, but it's somewhere in between there, you know?
One of the things that I've always loved about you and been challenged by about you, and we go way back, is your optimism.
Yeah.
It's been very helpful, and it's also been challenging, and I
Hmm.
appreciate that about you sincerely. you know, um, your journey has been difficult, and yet it just blessed in so many ways. The way you present it and embrace it, and that's a lesson to all of us, quite
Yeah.
sincerely. You're the kind of friend and colleague who's always on my mind and always in my heart. You
Oh,
know,
thank you.
no, sincerely, I always miss you. I have so much respect for you. Life has moved too fast, and we don't have the time
I
together
know.
I wish we had. But just
Yeah.
know that I just value you so much, and I'm so grateful you sat down and took to this and made it happen. I think it was really important, and it's going to be important for the reader. So
Yeah.
many
Thank you.
people,
Thank
many
you.
people buy it. So would you please
Yeah.
tell people where they can buy it, and if you have any social media handles?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, so you can get it in paperback, and it's also on Kindle. And originally, when I first launched it, those were in two separate links, but they've now combined them, so you can find the Kindle or the paperback in the same link on
Great,
Amazon.
excellent.
Um, and I'm on LinkedIn, and then I don't have a lot of social media, and KO Collins on Facebook.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah. But
Uh,
to add to what you said, you're not the only one. I don't know. I don't know if they would use the word challenge, but I remember when I had my surgery. my mom's friend was there, and she sent me a get well card, and she said that I was smiling as I was being wheeled off to the operating room. And I wasn't aware that I was doing that. You know what I mean? But it's like that's been commented on many times. I don't know where I get it from. I've just always been that way, and I don't really question it. Um,
I don't think you should. I mean,
yeah,
it's a
yeah,
gift,
yeah,
and challenging people is important. I mean,
yeah,
complacency, nothing's ever grown out of complacency. So
yeah.
I appreciate the challenge, and I love you very much, and thank you so much for your patience and making this happen.
Oh, no problem. I love you too, and I'm
Okay,
glad that we were able to do this together.
for
Yeah,
sure. Okay,
yeah.
take care.
All right, you too. All right,
Bye. Bye.
bye bye.